Dear students, welcome once again to your preparatory module of English language for your CLAT exam. In this particular lecture, we are going to talk about the approach that you need to adopt for CLAT passages, not only for CLAT passages, for any passage for that matter that comes to your UG level entrance examination. Now, in this particular lecture, we are going to practice skimming, scanning, annotation, and we discuss note making. In note making specifically, introduction, abbreviations and symbols, types of note making, and advantages of note making. Let's begin the lecture. In the last lecture, we have already come across this, that we need to skim the passage for a general understanding. We need to scan for specific information in response to questions. Also, to highlight key points, especially for the complex arguments, we need to annotate, and we must know how to take quick notes, because you'll be approaching these passages within a specific time frame. Hence, smart work is needed. Now, let's begin. First, let's practice skimming. Now, to practice skimming, scanning, and annotation, today I've taken this particular small paragraph for consideration. You can either stop the screen, you can pause the screen for 2 minutes and quickly read it out, or I'm going to read it out for you. Now, the title of this lecture is Bangladesh, the Future Ahead. Not long ago, Bangladesh was hailed as an economic miracle. Its singular focus on export textiles and apparel delivered rapid growth, lifting millions out of poverty and winning the country's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina fame and admiration. But Ms. Hasina's abrupt exit from power this week has exposed the limitations of this strategy. As Bangladesh struggles to combat steep inflation and joblessness that economists say are largely a result of poor policy decisions. Her increasingly authoritarian rule and Bangladesh's widespread corruption only added to the frustration that boiled over and forced her ouster. Now, Bangladesh must decide its future. Student protesters who had called for Ms. Hasina's resignation have brought in Muhammad Yunus, a Nobel laureate and a microfinance pioneer, to oversee an interim government. Mr. Yunus faces a daunting task. Most immediately, the country must restore order and stabilize its economy. In the longer run, Bangladesh will have to confront the wider economic stresses that had sent the protesters to the streets in the first place. All of that must happen on top of urgent demands to address the widespread abuses of Ms. Hasina's repressive tenure. Bangladesh underwent economic reforms starting in the 1970s, and the garment industry has been central to the country's economy for decades. But Ms. Hasina, who came to power in 2009, narrowed the country's focus to that single sector and expanded into new global markets, which drove much of Bangladesh's growth. Cheaply made garments were attractive to global clothing retailers, especially fast fashion brands like Zara and H&M. At the same time, the demand created livelihoods for millions of people, especially women, and transformed living standards. Now, having read this paragraph, what I came across that the paragraph relates to the current political turmoil of Bangladesh, and it primarily talks about the tenure of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, her ouster, and then coming in of the temporary government. Muhammad Yunus, a Nobel laureate and a microfinance pioneer, has taken oath as the head of the new government. However, the passage in its entirety talks about Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, her rise to fame, and how some of her financial or perhaps economic blunders have closed the doors for Bangladesh's economy. Now, when it comes to skimming, skimming always happens at the very first stage. So skimming involves you reading the passage in a very hurried manner, in a manner that makes you understand or that gives you the basic idea of what the passage is about. Now, here's something you need to understand here. Skimming is only for giving a cursory look to the passage to tell you what exactly is this passage about, not anything else. So when I skim this particular passage, what I came across. Now you can see this slide. Skimming the passage quickly, this is what we came across. The paragraph is about the state of politics, or perhaps the current state of politics in Bangladesh. Prima facie, at the very first look, it talks about the ouster of PM Sheikh Hasina, students' protest that led to her ouster, economic reforms, and garment industry. Now, what it says, skimming allows you to get a grasp of the important points of the paragraph without going into the specifics. So here, reading this particular passage, what I came across is that this particular paragraph discusses the current state of politics, also the ouster, the reasons of the ouster, and the economic reforms, the economic condition, and the garment industry of Bangladesh. This is what we came across. Moving on, now let's practice a bit of scanning. Now, dear students, you all must know that we are practicing only one paragraph right now. While we are in the classes, we have certain limitations. However, for you to prepare well for your CLAT exam, you have to practice at least 20 or 25 passages like this so that you get accustomed to the practice of skimming or scanning, or whatever practices we do here in the classroom, we'll always do it in a limited number. However, once you practice by yourself, you don't have any such limitation. So you need to give yourself enough practice for any of the concepts. Now, let's practice scanning. Now, scanning is generally done to seek an answer to a question. Without question, we cannot really scan. So because scanning is done to find any specific piece of information. Now, here's a question for our reference so that we can scan the information that we seek from the passage. Now, the question is, what was the impact of the expansion of garment industry in Bangladesh's economy? Now, we have four options. A, it made Bangladesh the biggest exporter of garments in the world. It made Bangladesh the leading exporter of garments in South Asia. It created mass employment and transformed the lifestyle of the populace. It channelized the tax collection system of Bangladesh. Now, when I quickly scan the paragraph once again, I can very easily see that the first and the second option of making Bangladesh, if we go back, option 1 and option 2 is about the export of garments. Now, nowhere in the first paragraph is it mentioned. The second paragraph primarily talks about the economic condition of Bangladesh. The third paragraph could be of our use. However, nowhere it talks about Bangladesh's exports. Okay, though it talks about the fact that the garments of Bangladesh were attractive to global clothing retailers, but nowhere categorically talks about the two options that were mentioned in the question. So the first two questions, if you can see here, are out. Now, the option D is channelizing the tax collection system. So I am not finding the word tax anywhere. When you scan, you have to very quickly move your eyes to see if that word is, or any related word related to taxation, tax channel, collection of tax is mentioned anywhere in the paragraph. But it seems like the word is not mentioned anywhere. Now, that brings us to point C. It created mass employment and transformed the lifestyle of the populace. Okay, so option C. Now, somewhere we can see the first two sentences. Now, first two sentences run into three lines. First three. Please remember that there's a difference between sentence and line. Okay, so a paragraph as line. Line can be physically seen, okay, in the way the paragraph is written. However, sentence means one particular sentence which has a proper beginning, middle, and end. For example, the first sentence is, not long ago, Bangladesh was hailed as an economic miracle. Okay, so this first sentence is in the first line. Okay, so there's a difference between line and sentence. Now, its singular focus on exporting textiles and apparel delivered rapid growth, lifting millions out of poverty, okay, and winning the country's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina fame and admiration. All right. Now you see the last two sentences. So the last two sentences, the second last sentence starts from the third last line, that is cheaply. Cheaply made garments were attractive to global clothing retailers, especially fast fashion brands like Zara and H&M. At the same time, the demand created livelihood for millions of people, especially women, and transformed standards. Now, when we go back here, we see the answer to the question, that is point number 3. It created mass employment and transformed the lifestyle of the population. So, in scanning, what do? We figure out the keyword and we seek the answer of that particular question. Now, if you see scanning the paragraph quickly, this is what we came across. The mention of garment industry can be found at the end of the passage, also in the beginning. Along with that, there's a very clear mention of the impact of the expansion of garment industry in Bangladesh. Scanning helps us locate the keyword and search the answer of the question around the keyword. In this question, the keyword is garment. Okay, so I think that is making the concept somewhat clear to you. The keyword was garment industry. Okay, and we have read the question accordingly. We search for that keyword, and the answer lies somewhere around that keyword. So that is scanning. Now let's quickly practice annotation. Now, annotation is generally done to mark the key points. While you read the passage, it's not possible every time for you to read or reread the passage for each and every question that comes across. So, in that case, one must know that the main points are to be underlined or are to be highlighted in such a way that when you read a related question, you can directly refer to them and search for the answer. Not possible every time for you to go across the entire paragraph or the entire sentence, okay, to search for the answer. If you follow this way, you might be wasting a lot of time in the examination. So that's why annotation is done. Especially annotation is especially useful when it is a pen and paper question paper. Okay, in online examination, there's no space of annotation. However, in a pen and paper format, annotation is quite useful. Now, annotation is required to underline or highlight the major points of the passage. Now, if we see this particular passage, again, we are taking for the reference the same paragraph, Bangladesh, the future ahead. Now, annotating paragraph, okay, we came across something like this. Now, if you see, I've highlighted in various different ways the main points. For example, Ms. Hasina's abrupt exit from power this week, the ouster of the Prime Minister that had happened. Second paragraph, Ms. Hasina's resignation have brought in Muhammad Yunus. Okay, so the new government, a temporary government, is headed by Muhammad Yunus. The economic reforms that we were talking about, the garment industry, started in 1970s, and that became pivotal in Bangladesh's growth, and that created livelihoods for millions of people. That's the last line, especially women, and transformed living standards. Now, this is only for your reference. So when you annotate, you have to annotate the keywords, you have to annotate the major points. If the passage has arguments and counter arguments, you have to annotate both arguments and counter arguments, and that's how you need to move ahead. Okay, now annotating the paragraph quickly, this is what we came across. The main points are marked or highlighted so that they can be referred to at a later stage, and most of the important points and keywords are either marked or highlighted, and this is annotation that plays a major role when you look for the answer. This is especially important when paragraph is long, say a 900-word paragraph, okay, a 1,000-word paragraph that you might come across in the exams like IELTS. There, it becomes increasingly difficult to remember each and every point of information, each and every fact that is given. Their annotation helps you a lot. Now, the other part, the next part is note. Now, while it is a pen and paper examination or it is a general exam, online exam, you must know one thing fact that whenever you have too much data in one particular passage or whenever you have too much information, what you need to do is note it down somewhere. Note making is as simple as that. You are reading, say, a passage of 1,000 words, and say for that matter, that passage is online. You're taking computer test. Now, since you're taking a computer test, you have to scroll back and forth. Say the entire passage has 8 paragraphs or say 5 paragraphs. Now, in your screen, you can see only 2 paragraphs. Now, when you scroll forward, you go to the other 2 paragraphs and then the last paragraph. That's why you have to toggle between the screens 2 to 3 times. Now, when you have any such information or any such situation, what becomes extremely important is the fact that you keep noting down any important points that you might come across. And this is where note making becomes extremely important. Now, let's take you through some of the basics of note making and some of the methods of note making that we generally study. Okay. Now, introduction. Now, taking good lecture notes is a difficult but essential skill, as your note acts first and foremost as a written record of lecture material that we study from later. Now, let this be a guide not only for your exams but also for your lecture. For example, say you've landed in college to a good NLP. Now, in the classroom also, you'll have to make notes. Now, the act of note taking itself helps you keep focused on lecture and starts to put information into memory. While many people think of note taking as something you do during a lecture, effective note taking is in fact a 3-part process. What is a 3-part process? Preparing to take notes, taking concise notes, organized notes during the lecture, reviewing the notes after class. For examination point of view, it will be preparing the notes, taking concise and organized notes as you read the passage. Okay, the review part not to be done, but the 2 parts become extremely important. Now, when we take notes, okay, whenever you take notes, I'm going to tell you some small tips that save a lot of time in the long run. Collectively, if you're taking 8 paragraphs of English, say in a 2-hour test, and from these techniques you're saving 7 to 10 minutes, that's a lot of time for an examination that goes on for say 120 minutes. That's a substantial part of your time. Now, when we take notes, there are a few things that you need to understand. Even if you're jotting down those points on a piece of paper, you try to take information in as concise manner as possible. That's why when we take notes, we use abbreviations and symbols. For example, like symbol meaning is number, then W/O is without, then increase, decrease. Example is e.g., then leads to, versus, less than, percentage, greater than, and, therefore, at, with, without, plus, minus. All these things are abbreviations and symbols. Other than that, if you're noting down some very important line which you think might be referred to at a later stage, or perhaps something from that can be asked, then you can use recognizable abbreviations for common terms or words. For example, for definition, for department, for formula, maximum, function, solution, exercise. Now, these abbreviations are generally either known, okay, or perhaps you can make your own abbreviations as well. Why? Because notes are made for your personal reference. Okay, notes are not to be, you know, they will not go to anyone else. Okay? You'll only be referring to them. Okay. Now, for example, the previous screen that I've shown you has some recognized abbreviations. Here, you can also make, like I said, your own abbreviations. Okay. For that, just use enough of a word to make it recognizable. For example, behavior is BHAV or BHV. Organization, important. IMP also is an important, like a recognized short form, but you can make any as per your ease: evidence, question, homework, association, government, anything like this. So the first tip is to use as many abbreviations, symbols as you can, because that will make your notes extremely concise. Now, sorry, there are a few methods of note taking that we are going to discuss in this particular module. Now you can just take a look at these 5 methods that are given here. Now, the 5 types of note taking methods are: first, boxing method; second is outline method; third is Cornell method; fourth is mapping method; and fifth is charting method. Now, we are going to discuss all these methods one by one in this particular lecture, so that during your note making session, or perhaps during the exam, or when you start practicing this, you can choose any note taking method at your ease and you can use that in the exam. Now, first is the boxing method. What it says, the boxing method requires you to put your notes in boxes. Each page of your notes is filled with several boxes. Inside the boxes are all interrelated content. You can divide the boxes by topics or subtopics as you choose. The advantage of this note-taking method is that it's also simple and visually appealing. It allows you to compartmentalize ideas in an organized and effective manner. You can review and focus on one box thoroughly just before you move on to another. However, similar to charting, this note-taking method is not suitable to be used during lectures, and it requires more time to organize. Now, this is something that we call boxing. You have the main topic in a big box, then you have subtopic A, B, C in other small boxes, and then you have main topic B, and then you have subtopic A and subtopic B in other small boxes. All right. Second is outline method. Undoubtedly, the most popular and simplest of the note-taking methods is the outline method. You organize your notes with the main topic, then a subtopic that is intended to the right below it, then supporting facts that are required, okay, and you further indent it to the right below. Basically, you outline your notes using bullet points. It's popular because it's quick and easy. You don't have to waste much time editing or reviewing notes, while also being logically structured in an easy to read way. However, it can look more messy in classes that feature graphs, diagrams, or formulas. Okay. Now, here is this method. Now, also it can be difficult to use this method if your lesson does not have a structured and coherent flow and jumps from topic to topic. Here is the method that we are referring to. First is the main topic, then indent to right, subtopic A, then further indent to right, key points A, B, C, then subtopic B, then main topic B, so on and so forth. Okay, now in the coming lectures, we are going to practice all these note making methods. However, before we practice, it becomes extremely important for us to understand what these methods are. Third method is known as the Cornell method. One of the classics, the Cornell method was developed by education professor Dr. Walter Pock of Cornell University in the 1940s. This note-taking method recommends students to divide a page into 3 sections: notes right, cues left, and summary bottom. The notes section should be bigger and comprise of main ideas taken from lectures or text in the form of short sentences, formulas, or diagrams. Keywords on the subject or relevant questions are written in the cues section. Furthermore, the summary section is a review of the main points of that lesson or chapter. This note-taking method makes your notes all look good, organized, and clean. However, it also helps you study better. Research shows that the Cornell method makes students to observe the information that is given at a faster rate. Okay, that means your comprehension is faster. You do this by covering the notes section when doing a review and using the Q section's keywords or question as prompts to remember what's in the notes section. It's recommended for you to do this a few times. Testing yourself is one of the most methods of strengthening a memory. Now, here is the Cornell method. At the top, you write the title, then you make a table with two sides. To your right, you write the main points. To your left, you write the keywords, and at the bottom, you write the summary. Something like this. Okay. First, we have at the title, we have the top comes the title, then the Q column, okay, which is primarily to the left, which is 2.5 inches, main ideas, questions and connecting points, diagrams, study prompts, okay. All these things comes at the left hand side. The right hand side, we have notes column, and in the summary column is at the very bottom. Okay. Now, after this, let's move on to the next method, which is known as mapping method. Now, using comprehension and focus abilities, mapping develops into a note-taking format that connects every information or concept, every other fact or idea. A lecture's content is represented graphically in mapping. It is an approach that encourages critical thinking, increases active engagement, and provides instant awareness of its comprehension. Okay. Now, see, this is how mapping method. Now, mapping method has a particular advantage from exam point of view. In examination, you might be provided a rough page. Now, mapping method in particular doesn't really want you to follow a particular pattern. You just randomly scribble the main point, put it in a box, draw 3-4 lines around it, write some subtopics. You can connect those subtopics with some key points, say key point A, B, C, and then you just draw subtopic B, then key point A, B, C, subtopic C, key point A, B, C, so on and so forth. Okay, it's visually appealing. However, it might take a little bit of space. Okay, but there's no specific pattern that you need to follow for this particular method. Now, moving on, the fifth one is charting. The charting method is done by organizing notes into a table with distinct rows and columns separated by categories. This is especially useful for classes where there are many relationships between facts and ideas. Obviously, it is most effective for you to make comparisons between each topic. Now, here we see this particular method where the first you have main topic A. If there are more than one main topics, you can make subcategories of the table. Main topic A, then subtopic A, and then various key points. Say key point A, B, C, D, and then subtopic B, and then again key point A, B, C, so on and so forth. Okay, so this particular method is known as charting method. Okay, where you make a chart. Okay, a chart, and accordingly you write the main topic, the key points, and the sub. Now, let's very quickly look at the advantages of note making. Now, note making has personalized convenience that every individual can make notes according to his or her own understanding of the matter, which means even if the source of two notes is the same, they will be unique because each note maker is free to personalize their notes in a way she finds best. Reversible, the same way notes help us to make the information, we can write a descriptive account of this information with the help of notes as well. So the decompression of the content is possible, alterable, you can change. Okay, with time we like now this is primarily from the point of view of your lectures. With time, as we keep on going through the notes again and again, we can make changes according to our convenience. Quick learning, this note, this particular point stands in close relation to our first point. As we personalize convenience, we make our notes more and more comprehensible. As a result, these notes help us to memorize the source main text more and more easily and quickly, because obviously a text better understood is a best text better learned. Okay, and what I can say from your examination point of view, a text better understood, okay, and better learned, perhaps better jotted down, is something from which you can take quick reference when it comes to answering questions. So these are some of the things that I had to discuss with you in today's lecture. In the coming lectures, we will be practicing these note-taking methods. So for this particular lecture, we end here. Thank you. In the coming lecture, we begin with the practice of note-making. I hope you all have enjoyed today's lecture. Thank you.